How many of you are teachers? Pretty much everybody. How many of you remember the first time, your first teaching job when you first walked into a classroom? How many of you remember that? Yeah. And I remember my first teaching job. I was teaching high school French, and I walked in, and very quickly it was evident that I was not only teaching a foreign language to my students. They were learning a language. I was learning a new foreign language also, and that was the language of education, educationese. And back then, this was back in the last century when I started teaching, is the language of education, it sounded something like this. Take attendance, chaperone dances, grade your papers, go to staff meetings, crack through the state test, issue report cards, do your lesson plans, have parent-teacher conferences, you have lunch duty, make sure you do professional development, get a textbook and a workbook, and make sure you keep your grade book current. So that was pretty easy. It was a little overwhelming at first, but I got pretty fluent in the language of education, became very successful. And then around the turn of the century, which sounds so old, but around the turn of the century and into, some of you know what I'm talking about, and into the early 2000s, the language of education changed. It kind of became language education 2.0. And all of a sudden we had this whole new slew of words that were coming into us that we had to learn, and they looked something like this. We're going to use iPads. No, we're going to use Chromebooks. Hey, we want you to use Kia, we want you to use Quizlet, we want you to use Kahoot. Also, you need to use an online textbook, Schoology, Google Classroom, you need to flip your classroom, you need to do blended learning, we want digital assessments, and we want it all in your online gradebook, Power School, so parents can see whenever they want. And I was like, whoa. But luckily, I was tech savvy, so I learned the lingo. I used as much as I could. I wasn't quite as fluent because I couldn't do all this in the classroom. It was impossible. But I still felt fairly successful. Well then, about 10 years ago, and really into today, the language of education changed again. We're sort of an education 3.0. And now, the language of education was so complex that we don't even bother speaking in words anymore. We just use acronyms to talk about everything. So this is what language education looks like now. And I'll go with the Michigan back here. You need your RTI, you need your BIP, you need your EDP, your TBT, don't forget to do your PLC, you got your PBL, you got your ISS, you got your 504, you got your IP, you got your MS, your SEL, you got your PBIS, make sure you do CEOs for the MBE. And we're all like, oh my gosh, how about you just let us TEACH? That's what So what it is it's like now there's all these balls that are just coming at us, and the teachers, we're the funnel, and we're trying to juggle all these balls and to give it in the funnel and streamline them down and help our students learn. But there's just too many balls. They're falling out, we're losing the students. It's just impossible to do it all. And the funny thing was, around the middle of this like avalanche of acronyms, that's when I left the classroom after 25 years, and I took a position in world languages at the Ohio Department of Education, and oh my gosh. I thought I knew acronyms of education. No, go to your state agency webpage if you want to see acronyms. So that was a whole different language that I had to learn in the Department of Education. So I would talk to teachers, luckily since I'm at the Department of Education, I work with teachers around Ohio, I work with teachers around the country, and everywhere we went, we were having the same conversation. What happened to language education? Or to the language of education, I should say. And there's all this terminology and all this digital technology, and we can't do any of it. It's just too much. And I kept thinking about it, and this is what happened, is culture happened. The culture of society changed, and as culture changes, language changes. So we became a much more digital, global society. That changed education, and that changed the language of education. Which can be a good thing, because the digital tools and all the acronyms for the programs are really designed to help our students succeed better. But the problem is not only does culture drive language, but language also can then start to affect the culture. And I think we see that a lot in education, for example, with all the technology. It used to be, let's get a couple good things, that we can be a better teacher, more efficient, we can help our students succeed better. But now it's become basically technology for technology's sake. We've forgotten all about the culture that drove it. It's now all about the language. What's the latest device? What's the latest gadget? What's the latest LMS that we can use to succeed? And so what has happened is it's actually had a negative effect on the culture of education. It's the same thing with the acronyms. We came up with all these acronyms that are so complex because our poor students, the problems they face today are so complex that we can't even summarize the program to address them in one word. We actually have to come up with these complex programs and acronyms to address the needs. But again, the same thing has happened. This culture to help the students, the language now has reversed and changed the culture. And now it becomes, what's the latest acronym? What's the latest magic bullet to help solve the world's problems for our students? And so it's had this negative effect in education where as soon as we hear an administrator or a department or whoever say, we're going to have a new device, or we're going to do a new technology, or we're going to have a new program we're going to do to help students, instead of saying, yes, I'm going to be a better teacher, my kids are going to be better, no, we say, oh my gosh, not another tech tool and not another acronym, OMG. So it is. So culture drives language, language drives culture, culture is language, and language is culture. I'm sure you've heard the expression in world languages that language and culture are inextricably linked. And that's what it means. You cannot have one without the other, because they are each other. Take our field, for example, foreign language. When I was in high school, I learned a foreign language. When I was in college and grad school, I studied foreign languages. I became a foreign language teacher. How many of you were foreign language teachers when you started? Okay, some of us old. Okay, good. Not quite so many old ones. Right. And so then one day someone told me, oh, you're not a foreign language teacher, you're a world language teacher. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And it makes sense to call it world languages now because of technology and the way society has changed. It makes much more sense to call it a world language, but you know the term fossilization of language? Oh my gosh, trying to get someone who almost my entire life was using the word foreign language to start using the word world language is very, very difficult. So if I do slip sometimes and say foreign language, it's just my fossilization kicking in. So we're going to take a look at how language has affected the language of education has affected world languages also. And we're going to do a little quiz. It's only 60 seconds, and you can do it with a partner next to you. It's just a speaking quiz here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 18 acronyms currently in use in world language education. And what I want you to do is I'm going to give you 60 seconds, and I want you to see how many of those can you actually say, what does each letter in the acronym stand for? Like, I work at ODE, the Ohio Department of Education. Okay, so get a partner, you got 60 seconds, you gotta go fast, and go. Okay, stop. All right, did anybody manage to get all of them? Oh, did anybody get at least most of them? All right, so we got some superior and distinguished people. Any novices in the room who was like, I got a few of them. Yeah, and it's funny because, again, education in world language, we've done the same thing. We've become acronym heavy. But the thing is, if you look at all of these acronyms, they reflect the culture shift that has happened in world language education. They all have to do with proficiency, with performance, with intercultural competence, with target language, with acquisition, with input. So these acronyms, again, the culture of world language education has drove the language of world language education. And I truly feel the biggest difference, or the biggest reason, and the impetus that this happened in world languages is because of the internet. Some of us actually started teaching. Who started teaching before there was the internet? Yes, all of us foreign language teachers. Yeah, exactly. So, and I speak that I truly, personally feel, since I experienced it, that the internet is the biggest change that has ever happened to world languages, from the culture and the language piece. When I first started teaching, my culture consisted of whatever was in the textbook, and whatever magazines and souvenirs I could schlep home in my suitcase from France, or mail home in that yellow cardboard box from the French post office. You know what I'm talking about. And so my language was basically me speaking French. If my district could afford a couple cassettes that went with the textbook, or I got a few music cassettes, or we got a few, French movies, that was the culture and language in my classroom. I was pretty much it. But that explains why 20 or 30 years ago we taught the way we did, because we didn't have access to culture and authentic language the way we do now. But now we do, and I truly think with the technology and the change in culture is literally at our fingertips every single day with our students, with their devices and us. I think it's time to change our name from Teachers of World Languages to Teachers of World Languages and Cultures. And we're actually trying, in Ohio, we're revising, we're updating our state standards, and we're going to put before the board to try and change our content area. Like last time we changed from foreign to world, now we're going to try and change from world languages to language and culture. I think Michigan should do it too. I think Ohio and Michigan should. We should unite. Forget the football. We should unite. I wish you well. Okay, but why do we need to focus on intercultural competence? Why is it so important? I'm going to give 3 reasons. There's numerous, but I'm going to talk about 3. Number 1, the research shows that students choose a language because their best friend takes it, they heard the language is easier, their parents want them to, they heard the teacher's really fun, the teacher doesn't give homework. That's why students choose, that's why students choose a language. However, what keeps them in the language is the culture. They get in there and they get excited about what we're doing. We show them really cool things from other countries. They learn about the musicians and the food Fridays. That's always the best thing forever, Fiesta Friday. And so, but the culture is what keeps the students in our programs. So that's one of the reasons that we really want to have a culture first focus. The other reason, take a look at this. This is from the Detroit Regional Chamber. And it is the foreign direct investment in the greater Detroit region. And you can see there are over 1,300 international companies right here in Detroit with over 100,000 employees. And let's face it, world language programs, we are in crisis. They are cutting programs across the country, and middle school, high school, universities are eliminating it. We were talking last night, they're eliminating teacher education programs in world languages. We are in a crisis. And part of the reason is this defense that I'm sure as soon as I say it, it's going to make your blood boil as much as it does mine, is everybody speaks English. Which is like, no, number 1, they don't. It's like, oh, well, we can just use Google Translate, or I'll just take an interpreter with me. But, oh yeah, Google Translate, boy, if there's anything to make teachers mad, that'll do it. So, and it's true, but what happens is these businesses are not just looking for someone who speaks another language. Katia and I were talking last night at dinner. They are looking for people who are culturally competent, even more so than the language. They need both. And so when our administrators are cutting programs because we don't need a world language, we're never going to use it, yes, actually, you can use it right in your own backyard. Students, anyone never knows when you're going to use a language. Heck, you could marry someone from another country. You never know when you're going to need language and intercultural competence. My brothers are all engineers, and my oldest brother, he opens a lot of factories around the world. And when he opens a factory in the United States, he gets together all the engineers and they form a creative team and they brainstorm about what are you going to do, what's your vision, where do we want this to go. And so they do this whole long creative process to get the factory exactly the way they want it. So the first time he went to China to try and open a factory, he had a Chinese interpreter. The Chinese engineer spoke English, so he's like, I think we're good. He walked into the meeting with the Chinese engineers, and he said, hey, all right, we're going to have our creative week. What's the process? What do you guys want? Where do you envision this going? And the Chinese engineers just looked at him, and he's like, what's wrong? And they're like, we don't do creativity. That's why we hired you. We're like, you come up with everything, and then we'll just do it. Just tell us what to do, and we will do it. And he was shocked because he thought he was ready because he had the language, the communication piece down. He had an interpreter. Everybody spoke English, but no one had informed him about the culture shift when you go over and work in China. So, and he and I were talking the other night because I was telling him about the conference and about what I was going to be talking about. And he said the reason that we are so successful in China with our company is because I navigate the Chinese culture. It has nothing to do with whether I speak Chinese or not. He's like, I attend dinners with them, I go to their events, I understand their perspective. We are successful in China because of my cultural competence with the Chinese. Again, another reason, it is not just about everybody speaks English or I don't really speak the language. It is about intercultural competence. And even, I mentioned there was 3 reasons. Beyond that, Okay, sorry, here's just another one. This is from oct2019.gov.com, and it gives all the nations in the Detroit area that use other languages that are foreign direct investment. And notice also that the top languages are the top companies are Japan, Germany, Canada, and France. Those 3 languages. And a lot of times, and this is the same as Ohio, a lot of times when language programs are getting eliminated, what are the languages getting eliminated? Those. So we need to advocate for our area because no one else will. They remember languages from when they took it back in high school, back in the last century probably. And we need to say no, it is about the cultural competence, and we can use these languages right now in our own backyard with our students. So the third thing to talk about is when we talk about culture, we're not just talking about international culture, we're talking about the culture right within America. I mean, think about in your classroom, and like there's a district culture, and then there's a building culture, but then there's a classroom culture, and even I think of your first period class, how the culture of that class drives the language that you use versus your last period of the day, and how the culture of that class drives the language. So this is not just about, well, it's international culture and we don't have to worry. No, this is how to navigate any type of culture, whether it's domestic or international. And that's what's so cool about being a world language, a world language teacher right now, is that we are teaching our students intercultural communication and intercultural competence no matter where, whether they're here or whether they're in another country. We are teaching them to develop interpersonal relationships. So there's actually, so beyond just the business side, there's myriad research out there about how intercultural competence is developed. So in your free time, go and find some of this research and read about it, but to save you, I'll show you. So the first thing that happens on the path to intercultural competence is there has to be an awareness of self. Students have to, and anyone, not just students, have to understand their own personal perspectives and values. Because research shows if we don't understand why, not just what we do, but why we do what we do, we will never be able to develop a perspective to understand the perspectives, of another culture. We have to understand what we do. For example, if I asked all of you right now, how do you celebrate a birthday? You'd probably say we do birthday cake, etc., but then everyone would probably have something else that we add on. So when we're doing this with students or whomever, it's that they start to realize, even though I think I know what American culture is, that's not even it. There is culture and subculture and sub and microcultures. So the very first step we have to do with our students is we have to make them aware of why we do what we do here. The second step is curiosity, to explore diverse perspectives, value intercultural experiences. And I know that my initial reaction is really high school kids' curiosity. Their curiosity is their cell phone right here with, what is it, there's Bitmoji, we were talking about Bitmojis last night. Yeah, and so it's like they don't really have any curiosity. But actually, think about it. How many times do you teach something in class with culture and there's that student who's like, oh my gosh, that's so weird, and why do they do that, and we don't do that? Look what that student has done. They have taught awareness, that they know it's different from what we do, and they are curious about why someone else does it. So first we have to get over our defensiveness of, okay, don't attack my culture, I love my culture, and back off and say, okay, first off, let's not say it's weird, let's just say it's, culturally diversified or something, I don't know, whatever. Change their language, but then grab it, throw away whatever else you're doing, because if your students show curiosity in something, you want to grab it and you want to run with it, because they have already put themselves on the path to intercultural competence. The next step is sensitivity and empathy, which, let's face it, that is seriously lacking in today's society. And empathy, I don't know if any of you follow or listen to Brene Brown ever. She does a lot of talks on empathy, and empathy can be taught. And world language classes, we are in a unique position to help students experience other cultures, experience other perspectives, compare it to our own, identify it, and really talk about, maybe you don't agree with it, maybe you disagree with it, but at least you are empathetic to why they're doing what they're doing. And that's something that we do in world language classes that we are so lucky to do. I truly, truly do feel that we have the best content ever. The next step is to develop a decentered perspective and withhold judgment. And I think as world language teachers, most of us are there. How many of you remember the first time you took you had an extended stay in your target culture? Remember that first time? I remember the first time I went to France, and I spent a whole summer there by myself. And I remember when I was leaving, I'm like, okay, I'm not really French, but I really don't feel completely American anymore either. I sort of feel like this third person. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about having a decentered perspective. I don't judge Americans as much anymore, because let's face it, we all judge. And I don't judge things that happen with the French or the Francophone culture, because I understand the different perspectives, because I have experienced both of them. So we're working on trying to get our students to become more decentered. The last step is transformation. And I think as world language teachers, probably every single person in this room has been transformed by studying other languages and cultures. I am a completely different person than I ever was before I started studying French and Spanish and German and going to all these countries around the world. I have completely transformed from the person I was before that. The thing with the intercultural competence process is we never know how we're going to affect our students. We never know when they're going to hit this stage. We don't have them very long. They're teenagers. They're still cognitively growing. But the goal is, it's nice to sometimes, even though things are cyclical, it's nice to actually know there's a research-based process for how it works, so we can actually, when we can teach with intentionality that this is what I'm trying to do when I'm teaching my students intercultural competence. And that transformation piece, you know how it is, like 10 years afterwards, you get this student who you thought was never even paying attention in class, and then they send you an email, and they're like, oh my gosh, now I remember why when you were talking about the first day of school in Germany about how important it was, and then they have hit that transformation piece, that it has changed them. So we want to remember, sometimes we'll never know if we have accomplished this with our students, but we know we can set them on the path to do it. And again, that is what we have to advocate to our administrators and our community and our students and parents. We are not just about language, and we are not even just about culture. We are about interpersonal, communicative relationships, targeting these and developing these specific skills that benefit anyone. They're just life skills. Okay. So the thing is that, this is great, this is all theoretical and everything, but how do I actually do this in my classroom? I think Michael alluded to that, or I think about it. How do I actually do this in my classroom? Or no, it was Aaron said that we don't really know how to do it. As Michael mentioned, I was the co-chair for the can-do statements for language and for interculturality, or intercultural competence. And when we were writing them, it was a 3-year process. We spent about 2 years on the culture can-dos and then another year revising the language ones. And it was brutal. I have to tell you, it was brutal. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours researching intercultural competence. We had experts on the team. We had OPI testers on the team. We actually had intercultural experts from around the world look at what we were doing and give us feedback. Are we on the right path? Are we doing this? Because we said we want something that truly is addressing intercultural competence, but also is user-friendly for students and for teachers. And so there's actually a cycle from Scrino and LiticCode that outlines the intercultural learning process. And again, it's not always this easy, but at least these are the components. How many of you use the language can-dos? How many of you use the language can-dos? All right, how many of you use the intercultural can-dos? Okay, some of you, just definitely not as much. So I want to explain how they work. They're on the ACFA website, they're on the NACESFA website, and the Ohio Department of Education World Language site, we have them, so they're everywhere that you can get them. But I want to talk about this process because as you look at the intercultural can-do statements, they follow these 3 components. There's an investigate piece, an interact piece, and a reflection piece. And you'll notice that every intercultural can-do statement starts with in my own and other cultures. That addresses that awareness of self that we were talking about before. And there's an investigate, which is the noticing and comparing, that curiosity we were talking about. And we're going to actually look at a couple of them together so you can sort of see, experience like how they would work in the classroom. So the investigate is where we put them across 20 different typical areas of culture, stereotypes, dining, shopping, economy, all the type of things that are usually addressed in intercultural lessons in the classroom or that affect the real world. And so the students investigate and learn more about the perspectives, about the values, etc. With every investigate can-do, there is an interact can-do that also says, what would this actually look like in a real-life intercultural interaction? And we tried to make them so like they could be done with technology because you can't always have that real-life interaction. They can be done with technology. It can be interacting online with different things. And what's nice about the investigate and interact is it's not just intercultural competence, it's intercultural communicative competence, which means we want them talking about the culture, growing in intercultural competence in the target language, not in English, which is the difficult part for teachers. And I think that's why teachers don't do it, because it's hard. So what we did with the intercultural can-dos is we actually leveled them for the proficiency levels of novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, distinguished. So the intercultural can-do for a novice learner is something that they can do in the target language using words, phrases, simple sentences. The intermediate intercultural can-dos follow the same theme, but in order to do it, they need connected sentences. They need to start going into time frames. They need to start going into more complex structures and paragraph-length text, and it just continues up the spectrum. So that's what's really nice, is it's not that I can't do this because my kids can't do it in English. Take a look at the intercultural can-dos because they show you how, in the target language, they show you how the kids can do it in the target language. The third piece is the reflection piece. And we had a huge discussion about this because the research shows that students cannot do deeper intercultural reflection. They have to do it in their native language. They cannot do it in the target language. And we struggle because we obviously want to focus on the target language, but we also don't want our students to take 2 or 3 years of language and never be able to get out of novice level intercultural competence because they don't have the language. So the third part of our tool is we actually came up with a reflection tool that is meant to be done outside of class in conjunction with the target language can-dos. So you do the investigation and the interaction piece in class, and then outside of class, you give the students deeper reflection that they can do on the topics you're discussing. And then we also include, how do I bring that back into the classroom in the target language? Like I said, all of this is explained on those pages. I think tomorrow I'm doing a session on the intercultural can-dos. If you're interested in learning more, come there and we'll actually go through it a little bit more in depth. But I do want to encourage you, if you're not teaching culture in the target language and you haven't looked at the intercultural can-dos, take a look at them because they really show you how to get through the cycle. So let's do a couple and see what it will look like in the classroom because it's more practical and this is more fun than just listening to me do like theory. Okay, so here's one. This is a novice intercultural can-do statement. And it says, in my own and other cultures, I can identify how, what, and why people eat what they do. So the how and the what is what a lot of us cover, but the why is where we start getting into the perspectives and the values and the attitudes. So what does that look like for a novice learner? So let's take a look at how we could do it. Happy meals, because what kid doesn't want to talk about happy meals? So, and this is an authentic resource. These are pictures directly from the McDonald's websites from all of those countries. So authentic resources don't have to be these big, complex things. They can, you can find a menu. They can just be something simple. So notice the novice learner is how, what, and why. So what can we do with a novice learner? They can talk about what foods they see. They can talk about the foods they like, they don't like. They can talk about colors. They can talk about adjectives. They can talk about this is healthy, this is not healthy, because remember, the culture is driving the language. So if we need the students to talk about what is healthy, we need to make sure they know how to say this is healthy, this is not healthy. They could start doing some general comparisons about, they have orange juice, whereas we serve milk, whereas Italy have a Coke, I can't even tell them, yeah, Coke or something in Italy. They can do preferences in novice level language. I prefer the Italy Happy Meal because I love spaghetti and dinosaurs. I don't like the China Happy Meal because I want French fries when I eat. Or someone else could say, I like the China Happy Meal because it is more healthy. All very novice-y language, but they are beginning to identify similarities and differences and compare cultures with that. You can take it outside of the classroom then and have it go deeper in the reflection piece and then have it come back in. How about our intermediate learners? We can start with the same thing. We don't have to get a new picture, but just take it up a notch, okay? Have them research how many Happy Meals are sold in each of our country and the target country. And why is fast food so prevalent in the USA? How does that reflect society? How does that reflect family structures? They could get into more complex structures about when you were young, what toys did you get in a Happy Meal, and how have Happy Meals changed, and you could get the time frames in there. You could get more advanced language in there. So this is the biggest piece of advice I ever give teachers, and probably the one that most teachers tell me has helped them the most, is that when we're talking about trying to teach with authentic resources and cultural resources in the time, is I tell them, instead of trying to find 50 resources to fit 50 activities, find one good resource and use it across every level and across every single thing you're doing in the classroom. Because we could use that for if you do units or stories or whatever it is that you teach language. We could do vocabulary, we could do structures, we could do chunks of language, we could do time frames, we could do reading, writing, listening, speaking, other things launch from it. So if you can find one good, authentic resource, it will anchor everything. It will save you so much time and it will develop an alignment with all of your courses. Plus, think about it. If Sunday night you're planning your lesson, and all you had to do was use this picture in every class and let the culture drive it, think about how nice your Sunday night would be instead of that nightmare the Sunday nights usually are. Let's look at another one really quickly. I'm running out of time here. This is an intermediate can-do, or intercultural, and it says, I can identify and compare the values expressed by the ways people celebrate holidays or festivals. Again, I just took pictures right off of different websites. You can go on YouTube, Google Images and YouTube can pretty much give you everything you need for intercultural resources. And so, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but you can look at the USA, look at the difference between a French parade on Bastille Day and the USA parade on the 4th of July. Take a look at the difference in the picnics. Look at, we have Washington, D.C., and we have the Eiffel Tower. You could get so much language out of that at the novice, intermediate, advanced, starting to compare what does it signify by what we eat, what's the theme, why is it important. Again, the goal is what values are being expressed. And novices can do that because they can give one-word answers, or you can teach it. Well, I'm going to do one more really quickly, and this is about stereotypes or exaggerated views, so I can identify products that reveal that. And it's like stereotypes is a tough one to talk about in the target language with novice learners. So take a look. Oh, sorry, I got Ohio State souvenirs here. I'm not in Ann Arbor, but I am close to East Lansing. So anyways, we have souvenirs from Ohio, which is basically all Ohio State football stuff. And then we have souvenirs from France, which are baguettes with blue, white, and red ribbons, and berets, and Toulouse-Lautrec, and Mona Lisa posters everywhere. And again, we're trying to talk about stereotypes or exaggerated views. So again, starting out with the students, first, novice level, what do you see? What's different? What's the same? What themes do you see? What stereotypes do you see? Is this actually a good representation of Ohio? Is that a good representation of France? And then you can take it even beyond that and have the students. You can actually do a pre-learning thing where you, like either with the Happy Meals or with this, where you say, hey, if you were going to see a souvenir shop in France, what do you think you would see in it? And if you were going to see a souvenir shop in Ohio, or Michigan, what do you think you would see in it? Or the Happy Meals. Hey, if there were going to be an Italian Happy Meal, what do you think would be in it? And before they even see the pictures, let them do some pre-learning, some prior knowledge to go to it. But post, let them say, okay, I want you to make a souvenir shop that doesn't have stereotypes in it for Michigan and for France or Germany or whatever your country is. I want you to do the souvenirs. Or I want you to, instead of doing a Happy Meal for the US and France, I want you to do a sad meal for the US and in France, or an excited meal, or a sporty meal, or I don't know, whatever terms the kids are using these days. But the goal is, again, one good resource can launch everything you need for an entire lesson, a unit. You could even probably develop an entire year around this if you really tried. So again, the process is there. It gives teachers a way to just sort of see how does intercultural learning happen. So I want to end with two things. This, as most of you probably know, is the Day of the Dead altar. And this is a picture that actually 2 years ago my brother sent me, the same one who went to China, also opened factories in Mexico. So 2 years ago he was opening a factory in Mexico. And on the Day of the Dead, he sent me this picture. He's like, hey, look at what they're doing in my factory. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I figured he was sending it because I'm like a language and culture nerd or whatever. And I'm like, that's really cool. And he's like, no. He's like, look at the photo at the top of the altar. And it was a photo of our dad, because our dad had passed away a couple months before the Day of the Dead. And so in his company, they didn't really speak English. My brother doesn't really speak Spanish. So for their Day of the Dead altar, they built an altar with a picture of my dad on it. And they even incorporated, my dad was a policeman. Oops, I don't know why I just did that. Sorry, I got that thing there now. And my dad was a public speaker. He did Toastmasters, so they even incorporated that. So they actually built this altar, and language had nothing to do with it. I thought it was a perfect example of intercultural communication. They were grieving with my brother, they were empathizing with him, and truly it also changed my brother's perspective, because he had heard of these Day of the Dead altars, but it's like, oh, well, whatever. But then to actually experience it live with our father was it deepened the relationship between both him and his employees. Okay, last thing, and then I'll wrap up here, and that's Master Yoda, pace yourself you must. Because let's face it, when we're talking about letting culture drive language, using authentic resources, it's a lot of work. You have to move away from the textbook, or at least incorporate, you have to not just use the textbook. You can't just depend on readers, you can't just depend on made-up stories from the kids, you can't just depend on whatever you decide to bring in. We have to bring authentic culture into it, but it takes time to do it. And so what I usually tell teachers, and this is usually what they tell me works the best, is however many years of program you have in your school is usually how many years it takes to really change the curriculum. Most of them tell me that what they do is they start with level 1 and they say, okay, level 1 is going to be completely culture driven with the language. And then the following year we're going to do level 2. So you really have to pace yourself because otherwise it's just too hard. It's just too overwhelming. And then the last thing is just I sent you a little challenge before we leave today, and that is if you don't really teach with a culture first focus, my challenge to you is just come up with one little lesson, nothing huge, but one little lesson where you come up with an intercultural outcome and you use that to develop the language that is happening in your classroom. And find some sort of simple, authentic resource to anchor it. Like I said, just use a Happy Meal or something. So if you don't do this, that's my challenge. Just do one little lesson to just see what happens. If you are doing a culture first focus, my challenge to you is to help your colleagues who are struggling with it. Whether it's today at the conference, if you share ideas in the session, whether it's somebody in your district who's struggling with it, and also to advocate to the administrators about what we are doing in the world language classroom. Because what I want is I want everybody in Ohio and I want everyone in Michigan to walk out of here and say, I am not just a teacher of world languages, I am a teacher of world languages and cultures. Thank you.
There we go. Okay. To just wrap up, a couple of quick announcements, and then we've got a raffle. So when you came in, you were given a ticket, and we'll raffle up a couple of Amazon gift cards. Please, for let's see, I've gone totally blank. Okay, for the award recipients and for the those of you who were given the conference attendance grant, please hang on after we're finished. We'd like to get a picture of all of you. So please give us a minute after we're done here. And if we've got the tickets. Oh. Okay. Oh. There we go. That's the way. Okay, thanks, Julie. Okay, so please get your ticket out and 562979. 562979. We got it? 979. Great. Thank you. All right. Yes. A $50 Amazon gift card. And another $50 Amazon gift card. 562161. 562. Oh, great. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So please enjoy the conference, and we're going to break for lunch and then resume afterward with more sessions and workshops. Kathy does have a session this afternoon. She has a workshop tomorrow morning and another session. And again, the reception later on this afternoon for more door prizes. Thank you all very much. Have a good lunch. Photos.
guys enthusiastic? Chelsea?
Yeah, Tina, sorry.